Hello and welcome to Management Centred. My name is Yvette Giles. I'm one of the directors at the Management Centre Learning, and this is our first ever podcast episode, which we're really excited about. If you don't know us, Management Centre Learning is a training, learning and development company, and we support managers in the not-for-profit sectors. We really believe that learning can lead to greater social good. By that, we mean learning to be the best manager you can be means you can have even more impact in your work for the communities that you're working for. Now, this is a bit of an experiment. We want to know if you enjoyed listening to all things people management, if you enjoy this format, as well as the videos we provide on our blog. So do let us know what you think. You can email yvette@managementcentre.co.uk. That's YVETTE@managementcentre.co.uk. We'd love to know what you think. Now, in this podcast, Management Centred, we are aiming to do two things. The first is we want to explore what it means to be a manager, particularly in the not-for-profit sectors where we know the challenges are high. What does that mean? And ultimately, our second point is to give you practical advice that you can use every day in your work. So, you might be someone who manages other people. Perhaps you're looking to find out more about managing yourself. Maybe you're an aspiring manager. You want to take that first step and you're looking to get tooled up before you go there. Or maybe you're an experienced manager looking to step into leadership and really hone your skills. Whoever you are, we hope you're interested in people management. Now, we know that management is a big step. It's probably the biggest career step that you can take. Ultimately, you go from being responsible and accountable for doing brilliant work in your job to being accountable for the work that other people do. You're now responsible for a whole bunch of people, and that's a big change with a lot to learn. What we want to do in these podcasts is give you tools to do exactly that. So this episode is our first one, and we are going to focus on management and what this means for diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, sometimes known as EDI. And to do that, we're going to share with you the results of a project that we've been undertaking for the last 12 months or so. To give you a bit of context, this project was inspired by world events and by people brave enough to speak out in our sectors. Ruby Bailey Pratt talking about Me Too and fundraising. And of course, we're aware of both the challenges and changes happening at the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, looking into historical allegations of sexual harassment or assault. The work of Charities So White and their ongoing events such as Uncharitable Festival, looking into anti-racism in the sector. Charities So Straight, thinking about how we can be more inclusive as a sector to people of all genders. Pregnant Then Screwed and their work on parenting parity and, of course, women's equality. And, of course, Sarah Todd, disability activist and an inspiration herself. All of these experiences were telling us that DEI was such an important topic. But we also heard this from our participants, managers just like you, who knew these things mattered but felt really uninformed. People were telling us that they just felt uncertain, not knowing what to do, what action to take, alongside being passionate about wanting to be an inclusive manager, wanting people to be at their best and wanting to do the right thing, but being fearful about getting it wrong. So what did we do? We sought to answer two really important questions. First up, our training. Is our training as inclusive as it can be, making sure that everyone can benefit from the tools we offer? And secondly, what is it that managers need for them to feel confident and enabled to make sure their teams are inclusive as well? So that sounds pretty straightforward, just two questions, but the answer is, of course, incredibly complicated. And so we decided to take a team approach to this. And I looked for three champions to take us on a journey, a deep dive into these areas and find out more about race, gender and sexuality, and disability, including neurodiversity. So we're going to hear from those champions now and get a little bit of an intro. Rachel, let's go to you first of all. Let's hear more about you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Whittle. I'm a learning and development consultant here at the Management Centre. And I get the pleasure of working with managers across the sector to think about their management development, but also their communication skills. So looking at topics like influencing and how we can be assertive in the conversations we need to have, which is really important to consider when we're thinking about what's needed in our workplace, how we advocate and speak up, whether that's for ourselves or for other people. I've been looking at the disability lens, as Yvette said, and thinking about that both in terms of physical disability, mental disability, as well as neurodiversity. And it's a pretty broad topic, so there is no one definition. So I've been looking into lots of different areas to think about what we need to do to ask ourselves, are we being the most inclusive and accessible as possible?
Thank you very much, Rachel. We're also joined by Philly. Philly, let's hear about you.
Thank you. And yes, I'm Philly Graham. I'm a senior learning and development consultant at the Management Centre. I have been at MC for over 10 years now. I think I joined just after you, Yvette, a long time ago. But like Rachel, I specialise in management development and also supporting people to communicate more effectively. So very much thinking about the messages that we are there to communicate. How do we get those messages across? Maybe through pitches, maybe through presentations more formally, and maybe also through some of those informal conversations that we have with people. I also do lots around facilitation and coaching and really helping people to come together and have useful conversations, a bit like we're doing on this podcast today. Some of my recent work has been around helping support a group of apprentices at an arts organisation on a Success at Work programme, giving them key skills to help them to navigate themselves in the organisation. And I think, you know, if we had known, I've been in organisations for 20 years now, and we've come so far, haven't we, in DEI work. If we had known what we know now, then I think some of those skills would have been really useful to have that sense of earlier in our careers. I also do lots of work with aspiring managers, helping them to explore what management really means to them. I'm here as the Gender and Sexuality Champion, and it is an honour to be part of this team. As a cisgendered white woman, mum of two, in my 40s, pronouns she, her, I recognise that I come to this very much from a space of my own potential biases, and it has been wonderful to take a deeper dive into some of these important areas.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Philly. And we are also joined by Leonard. Leonard, tell us a bit more about you.
Well, thank you very much, Yvette. And hello, everyone. My name is Leonard Ho, and I'm a learning and development consultant, just like my colleagues here. My specialty is also in management development, and I do deliver a couple of programs from the Management Centre, the first one being the Emerging Managers Program. So really think about how do we help people who are new to management deal with management issues. And also we do a program that's project management. So really think about project management specifically around not-for-profits. And finally, a program called Managing Multiple Priorities. So a time management program, in effect, thinking about how do we make good choices around our time, how do we prioritize. So that's a little bit about myself and my work here in the Management Centre. In terms of my background, I just moved to the UK back in 2022, so I haven't been here for very long. And what's really interesting is that I bring with me a different set of interesting contexts, I would say. So I am also the race champion. So prior to coming to the UK, I was in the most dominant group in Singapore. So essentially, when you think of a Singaporean, I would probably look like that. And then moving over to the UK, I'm now a minority. So I look and sound different from most people around me. So this is a really sort of interesting space that I'm in, and I'm happy to provide sort of my own perspective on the situation.
Thank you very much, Leonard. And thank you all champions. You've been working incredibly hard this year and great to hear some of those personal experiences coming through. We will hear more about that shortly. I just want to give a bit more context to our listeners about the work we have been doing. And really, there's been 3 crucial stages. Our third stage was all about self-directed learning. This is about educating ourselves. There's so many resources available. We wanted to make sure we were across them. So we have been reading the literature, listening to podcasts, and watching lots and lots of videos and TED Talks to get ourselves into knowing more about these topics from a wide range of voices and experts. This has helped us with 2 things. Firstly, it's given us a list of resources to help us be effective trainers and facilitators and consultants. And secondly, it means we have a library of resources that we can recommend to managers just like you in their everyday work. So do let us know if you want that list. Secondly, we knew that would only get us so far. So we wanted to bring in some amazing experts to help us. That's right, training the trainers. No easy task, and they all rose to the challenge brilliantly. These trainers helped us to think through scenarios, both in terms of what we might face in a training environment, but also situations that managers might find themselves in, so we could help work out what to do and provide practical techniques that balance and handle the nuance of these areas. So a huge shout out to the 4 amazing women that have helped us on this journey. Sophia Moreau, helping us with understanding race and anti-racism, crucially, in the sector. Zara Todd, of course, helping us with disability and neurodiversity. To Anna Marsden, who helped us with exploring the experiences of the LGBTQIA+ community. And Andrea Newton, helping us understand menopause. A really interesting session, both personally and professionally, for many of us on that training course. These fantastic women have really helped us by bringing their expertise and their experiences that we could learn from. We will absolutely provide you with links to them so you can book your own session should you want to. We could not recommend them hard enough. And then our next stage was to do that dive work, a bit of an audit, looking at all of our training methods, as well as our content and the management approaches that we provide on our programs, to make sure that we're both inclusive in terms of the learning experience we offer, and also to give people the tools they need to be inclusive managers. No easy task. We've identified some 127 actions to work through. We're going through them all. I'm really pleased to say nothing terrifying in there, but an ongoing piece of work to make sure we move forward. So always evolving, always updating our ways of working in our programs. And what we want to do at this point is share with you the learning from both the process and where we would go next. So that's what I need our champions for. I'm going to hand over to you now to share your learning and your experiences. And Leonard, I just want to pick up on what you were talking about there in terms of your personal experience and the insights you've gained. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure, of course, Yvette. I think the first thing that was the most stark for me was really recognizing that, privilege is something that's really real. It's something that we tend to try to avoid talking about it because it makes us uncomfortable. But, that whole move from Singapore over to the UK really made me realize that, I'm now different. I live in a very different, space now. I'm now more cognizant of the difference between myself and somebody else that's here. So I think that's just one part of recognizing that I used to live in a place where I had lots of privilege and now I don't anymore. So that becomes more realistic for me. That's the first bit. And it's not just about privilege. It's also about understanding that privilege can lead to sort of changes in your perception, because if you've lived in privilege your entire lives, you might not see that it does change our perception. So recognizing in which how some of these perception can affect bias can be is a really, really important key step. So, for example, what's sort of normal for you? Growing up in a certain space, growing up white or growing up Asian like me, you can have your own different bias because what's normal to you as you're growing up might not be a normal experience for someone. So one key thing I've learned is not to use the word normal, because that is quite triggering for some people, because again, what's normal to you might be a bit different from somebody else. So thinking about, using change of words and thinking about common sort of experiences, which might happen if you grew up in this sort of space. So that's one key thing I've realized. The other key thing that I've also recognized is there is intersectionality. So really thinking about, for myself, I'm from East Asian sort of descent, but at the same time, I also belong to a different minority group. I'm also gay. So, it's just recognizing that just one thing that affects East Asians might also affect me in different ways. So really trying to put in all that different lens and trying to experience that from a different perspective is something that I think is key to a lot of our learnings here. Over to you, Yvette.
Thank you. That was really interesting to hear that a whole person perspective, that we all carry intersectionality. We're not just from one group. We all have lots of different parts of our identity. Has been really important in this work. Rachel, let's hear more from you and what you would add to that from your learning.
Thank you very much. Yes. As I said earlier, disability, there is no one definition. And that is deliberately so. It is broad without that need for diagnosis. And what that means is that everybody is likely to be disabled at some point in their lives, whether they recognise that themselves or not. So I think that point of being a whole person and recognising ourselves do change over time is really important, thinking about it through the disability lens. One thing that really stood out to me is learning more about the disability justice movement, which builds on what Leonard's just talked about with intersectionality, because this goes one step further from asking people what their access needs are in the environments they need to work in to be the best that they can be, to say, actually, how can we remove those barriers that people face altogether where possible? And that could look like thinking about how we intentionally design workplaces, training, spaces where people feel safe, where they don't always have to ask for adjustments. So some things that could look like, from a practical sense, is for us, we share our timetables in advance so people know exactly when the breaks are, and we can make sure that we stick to those so that those who need that time away from big groups for whatever reason know exactly what to expect in our sessions. Other things could look like providing fidget toys or pens and papers so people can doodle as they're concentrating to help them learn better as standard. So rather than waiting for people to ask if it's okay, encouraging that up front. So there are a couple of things that I thought were really interesting to share with everybody.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, really interesting. Practical steps, making change, not waiting to be told what to do, but taking away some of those common barriers. Really important. We've been working really hard on that. Thank you, Rachel. Let's go to Philly next then and see what you would add. Philly.
Thanks, Yvette. And yeah, it's been fascinating, hasn't it, Rachel, to think more about communication through our training. But I also think that, we've been putting a lens up to not just how we create safe spaces for our learners, but what is the advice that we're giving people when it comes to communicating key messages, and some of our communications programs adapting some of the advice that we're talking about there when it comes to how can we be more inclusive, how can we encourage more inclusive communication. And that might be focusing more on that clear, concise messaging, making sure that people are using simple language that everybody can understand and take on board. And that might be also thinking about the dials that we have available to dial up and down in terms of the non-verbal ways that we communicate. We're not all the same. And I think our journey has been for us to really consider how can we support people to involve all of their audience and use the dials that and the abilities that they were born with to do that, their strengths. So yeah, that's been really interesting, hasn't it? And overall, I guess for me, in terms of learning, it's really been that bit about creating safe spaces for learning as trainers, and really recognizing that we need to be allies for our participants and encourage them to be for each other. So making sure that we're role modeling inclusive practices. And, that might be about making sure that the voices across the participant group are being heard, that we're not making assumptions about why somebody's speaking or not speaking, that we're facilitating those conversations well and fairly. I guess for the gender and sexuality areas that I've been looking at more deeply, there are lots of different journeys that people are experiencing, you know, whether that be that they are going through a period of trying to understand their gender identity more. You know, there's small things we can do to make that a more comfortable place for them in a training room, you know, sharing our pronouns and not forcing others to do the same, but making sure that we are using people's names, not making assumptions about pronouns. That can go a really long way to supporting somebody to feel that it's a safe space for sharing. Also thinking about people who are going through menopausal symptoms. You know, it can be a really long period of time that people are experiencing some of those really debilitating symptoms. And Andrea Newton was wonderful at sharing with us, you know, just what that can look like for people. I think it's been very stigmatized, you know, and for us as trainers, as people supporting those safe spaces, you know, we've been looking at how can we reduce the stigma of people going through those experiences. And part of that is us thinking, how can we share stories and get some of those voices into our case studies, so when our managers are considering how they work with their teams, that is a factor that they might be considering might be happening for their teams. It's also about us thinking how we call out those inbuilt biases and helping managers to do that. So, you know, there's been some great work around, you know, do we promote on confidence or competence? And, you know, what the evidence is in the past is that we've absolutely focused more on that confidence area. And so in our training, you know, we're really trying to help people to think more about, are we looking for what the job actually requires? We know that more men go for positions where they don't have all of the criteria than women. And so it's about how can we support that focus on competence rather than confidence in how we're managing our teams. So small things can make a difference. I think that's a big learning that I've taken away, and these things can build and support those safe spaces for learning. So some of the things we've been doing are neutralising gender names on our case studies, having more balanced resources available from thought leaders that have a diverse range of voices, you know, making sure that some of those women voices are in there. Brené Brown, Frances Frey, Lovey A.J. Jones, Reshma Sujani, you know, these women who are putting really important messages out there, and challenging the stereotypes that are put forward. So making sure that we are not pigeonholing people, and through our case studies and through our examples that we use, we can make sure that we're doing just that. So this is about challenging ourselves as well, and making sure that we're putting those changes that Yvette spoke about into practice.
Thank you, Philly. Yes, it's definitely been an interesting challenge to constantly ask ourselves, does this work stereotype? Are we promoting one kind of best practice manager? And we've really been unpicking that this year and making sure that we don't. And we recognise the breadth of management experiences. Personally, I have found it fascinating hearing about the multiple identities we carry within the management centre and how that will translate to the multiple identities we'll have within our participants. You can't tell from looking at someone every part of their life. And that's been really important to think about the subtle ways in which our identities play out and what we can do to make sure everybody is welcome. And so that's really another area I want to talk about, is your takeaway for managers. What can managers take from this? We've talked about our training, but what about for the people we are training? What can they learn? And Philly, I'm going to go straight back to you to pick up on that. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I think it can feel really overwhelming, can't it, for managers? And I guess to reassure managers that small things can really make a difference. So one of the things that I really took away from Sophia Moreau's session was her conversations around curious questions. How, as managers, can we lead with curious questions rather than assuming? And that might be saying things to them like, how are you experiencing the organisation? You know, asking a question about how do you like to work? And asking ourselves curious questions. Is what I'm going to suggest to my team now inclusive? You know, going out after work for some drinks, actually, do I need to consider, are some of the team going to be able to do that? Maybe they have to rush home, they've got caring responsibilities, they've got childcare pickups, they've been having hot sweats all night the night before, and all they want to do is get home and rest. It's asking ourselves and challenging ourselves on our own biases there. So I think having those curious questions to hand can be a really, really big step for managers. But also for managers not to worry that it's all on them. What managers can also do is give their teams permission to connect with their colleagues, to share conversations, to share their experiences with each other. I think what we've seen organisations do really well over the last few years is give permissions to their staff to create networks of support of people with shared experience. And when voices come together, they can be a stronger voice. So I think that's a really, really strong thing that managers can do to support their teams.
I think that's really lovely to hear, Philly. And I think I'll just add that, if you are one of those managers that Yvette spoke about at the start of the podcast, if you're worried about doing the wrong things or worried about saying the wrong things, I would argue that this is actually a really good thing. Because if we are worried, it just means that we are concerned about these issues. So I would say if you're worried, listen to this podcast. That is one great step ahead. And the other thing for us to also think about is it's also important to recognize that we will all make mistakes at some point. So we're not perfect. And recognizing that we will make that mistakes also means that we should be kind to ourselves and just go, I am trying here. But to help with that, the last step I'd like all of us to think about is really to be open to learning and educating ourselves. So one key sort of takeaway I got from our session with Sophia Moreau was really the concept of emotional tax. Essentially thinking about, being on guard when you are feeling a smaller sort of marginalized community. And I really experienced that back in my previous workplace where I was a minority. I was one of the very few gay men in a predominantly sort of straight environment. And I then, when I was told about this concept, what I then felt was actually, this is what I've been feeling all along, this hidden pressure of trying to hide a part of myself from everybody else that was making me really uncomfortable. So recognizing it is one part of it. What's even more important is that if you can recognize this feeling, it therefore means to say that you can also be, in the other areas where you are a majority, that is when we need to learn to speak up as an ally, or even create that whole concept around psychological safety, which is what Anna Marsden spoke about in our session as well. So these are really great learnings that we have taken from all these experts. And that's what I encourage all of us to do, to start being open to learning and educating ourselves. Thank you, Yvette.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting to hear what we've learned at sort of that big level, but also our personal experiences have been really important on this journey. Rachel, last and not at all least, what advice would you be giving? What have you taken away?
I would definitely echo everything that Philly and Leonard have spoken about. And I think it's really important to recognise that everybody has access needs. Just lots of the ones that we have might already be met by the ways that we work already. So we don't consciously consider them. And so really important to ask those curious questions, not only for ourselves, but to others, and not ask for a label. It doesn't matter whether someone's diagnosed or not, because we don't know what that means for them and what they need. So really understanding, what do you need to work in the best way for you, and how can I support that, are two really simple questions that all managers can ask their teams to get the best and support them in the best possible way. And also, as Leonard says, sometimes we might make mistakes, but also we can't always be fully inclusive. Some of those access needs might clash. And so recognizing that we can't always get it 100% right, but what we can do is have the conversation to make sure people are as comfortable as possible. So really building those relationships with the people you're working with. Be proactive, so we can take away that need for people to ask for access needs where possible, thinking about, as Philly was talking about, where meetings are held, what times of day works for people, but also then being open to say, tell me what you need, and then we can think about how best to make this work for you. So ask lots of questions, be open to listening, and change it up. If it doesn't work for somebody, think about what you could do next instead. And together, that will help everyone feel more comfortable.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So interesting. There's some key themes coming from that, aren't there? There's an idea here about vulnerability, that as a manager wanting to be inclusive, we need to be vulnerable to both making a change and the fact we might get it wrong. We need to be open about ourselves as well to build that trust so that people can trust we're doing our best and we're trying and that the intention is there. And also to understand that we also have needs and we need people to trust that we are accessing what we need too. This idea about never assuming is such an important one. Having conversations relies on that trust, being open. And so one of the key things we've done that I think has been really interesting is we now provide information on the access needs we have tried to meet in our training. So this is what we already do, and tell us what else you need. And we focus on what do you need. Don't tell us what the problem is. Nobody has to disclose any part of their identity to us that they don't want to. We're just here to help make that change. So it's been a journey. It's ongoing. We have more to do. And it's really important to just say at Management Centre Learning, we are not EDI experts. We do not provide DEI training. But what we can do is support you to go on a similar journey. For us, EDI or DEI is something that needs to permeate through every part of management practice. And that's why it's embedded in our training. And we have learned so much. And we're really happy to share our top tips with you. You've heard some today. We can give you more. I would say that very first step starts with self. That vulnerability, be willing to make a change and question yourself. And the change will take work. It takes hard work to bring in change. So, for example, I'm really proud that we've made lots of changes to our recruitment process over the last few years. And it's made such a big difference. We've grown the team and we have the most diverse team we've ever had. They tell me they feel included, which I'm really pleased to hear. And it took a lot of work. And our champions and everyone at the Management Centre has been part of that process. Again, really happy to share with you. If you want more details, get in touch. So that first step, be vulnerable, get yourself educated. There's so many resources out there. You can do that work, make the time for it, block that time out, give yourself some learning space, but also do get those experts in. Again, we can put you in touch with the people we've met along the way who can provide you with really brilliant practical training and then make the changes. Put in the time and effort to change the way you work, change your approach and make a real difference. We're going to be keeping the momentum going on this. We've got more to do. We can keep you updated and we're really happy to provide more information. So do reach out. Huge thanks to the champions for all your work in the last year and the work you will be carrying on doing and for coming along today. And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this and you would like to hear our voices and hear more episodes, do give us your suggestions. We really want to know, what do you want to hear about? So email yvette@managementcentre.co.uk. That's YVETTE@managementcentre.co.uk. Thank you so much for lending us your time and listening along, and take good care.